The South African economy contracted by 51% in the second quarter, which covers the hard lockdown, that is the months of April, May and June. Now, this is the fourth consecutive contraction that the country has undergone. I'm now joined by our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, who continues this conversation with us today. Xolani, what one can say really is that it was to be expected that there would be a contraction, specifically during those hard lockdown periods. But 51%, is this a number that could have been anticipated?
No, absolutely. It could have been the number that was anticipated, because some of the forecasts actually looked at the second quarter actually contracting by as much as 45%. And many people didn't believe it when the first, forecasts were a contraction of 35%. But 51% is quite huge. And when you look at those sectors that have contributed the most to the contraction, mining, down 73.1%, and that's in the second quarter. And they have constantly been the poor performer in the economy, because in the first quarter we saw a contraction of 21.5%. Manufacturing was the same as well, not doing well there at 74.9% contraction, and that was in a different picture that we saw in the first quarter, where we had a contraction of only 8.5%. The big story here is that for the past year we've literally been in a recession, and South Africa's economy has been in a recession, and really nothing has changed in terms of that, except for the fact that the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown actually made matters worse.
Now, one thing that is for certain, as you said, that South Africa is in a recession. So now the common parlance and the common phrase has been economic recovery. This is something that the President has also been advocating for. But at this point, let's bring in the Statistician-General, Mr. Risenga Maluleke, who joins us now on the line. A very good afternoon to you, Mr. Maluleke. This is Thami, and we've got Xolani with us as well, who'll be joining in our conversation. The 51% contraction, Xolani and I were just deliberating about that, and is this something that could have been foreshadowed in your point of view? Was the number anticipated to be this high?
There were speculations, of course, in the public space that the economy would go on a slump as far as 45%, and some had predicted the contraction to about 60%. But indeed, for us as statisticians, while the public narrative and the expectation may be there, our job is to always go out and measure. So we will listen to commentators, we'll listen to speculation, but we have to go and measure. And as we have measured, the contraction in the second quarter is sitting at 51%. And of course, you can see that all industries, all sectors have gone on the negative. And in terms of industries, primary, secondary, tertiary, they went on a negative growth. And in terms of sectors, with an exception of agriculture, all the others had a negative growth and contributed in the negative to the final number, the final growth rate.
And which were the most hard hit of the sectors?
Certainly, if you look at construction, you look at the manufacturing, you look at the mining, they were hard hit. They have grown quite strongly in the negative, but also their contribution does suggest that.
Xolani?
Mr. Maluleke, one of the most notable things about today's data is the fact that this is the fourth consecutive decline since quarter 2 of 2019 when it comes to GDP. That tells us the past 12 months have not been good in the South African economy.
Well, our job is to measure, Xolani, and all the times we'll measure and come back and inform the public. Obviously, all the interfaces that occur in the economy will come out in the form of numbers. We are seeing this being the highest negative growth, and of course, this is a fourth quarter in a row in terms of negative growth. So we had already, by the first 2 quarters of negative growth, entered a recession. So the recession is sustained. That is the first part. The second issue is while from around 1993, this is the first time we see 4 quarters in a row indicating a negative growth. Previously, in the years 1991 to 1992, we had seen 8 sustained quarters in the negative.
And if you could take us back to the year 1991, 1992, and paint to us the circumstances that led to that extreme negative growth and how that juxtaposes to what we are experiencing today.
I don't think we can compare the years 1991 to 1992. And of course, myself, I was still at university, but I'm now Statistician-General. I don't think we can compare the two developments. They are the different times we are living in. Firstly, it's 1991, 92. The focus of the economy and the economic policies was in another direction. And of course, if you look at the sanctions at the time. But then you come here now, the economic focus in terms of policy is a different approach altogether. But of course, this quarter that we are reporting on, and plus the 3 previous quarters, have recorded a negative growth. But this quarter particularly, all over the world, the impact of COVID cannot be underestimated.
And that's a great point that you bring in there, Mr. Maluleke, the fact that it's not just South Africa that's been going through the coronavirus pandemic. When we look at the world and how their reporting has gone, how do they fare and how do we fare in juxtaposition to how their economies may have contracted?
The report on the GDP of Brazil came out on the 1st of September, and they went on negative 9.1% as of growth. And then when you look at that, you look at China, for example, it's slightly higher than 11% in the positive growth. But it's very difficult to compare these countries with us where we are standing, because we can say all of us were affected by COVID-19. But the different levels at which countries closed their borders in terms of the economy and economic activity, that no businesses would operate, came at different times. And as such, if you look at just the changes quarter on quarter, and we've made that number available, where we are saying that in our case, then when you look at those, you would have been sitting with no assumptions. You would be sitting at about 16.4% in the negative. But when you go back to compare with other countries, the defining issue within the COVID-19 environment is that the times at which a closure of economic activity was imposed by different countries occurred at different times, even within the same quarter.
Another piece of important information is the expenditure side, Mr. Risenga Maluleke. It's 52% down, and households as well. We saw a contraction there. Take us through what was happening in the expenditure side of the economy between April and June.
If we look at the expenditure in all areas, we have seen a negative growth with an exception of areas like utilities, electricity, water and gas, because people were at home. If you look at another area of education, it's because the learners remained in the system even when schools were closed. But some schools continued to teach in the process. And if you look at other areas, especially when you look at the side of trade in the form of imports and exports, you can see that the whole area of other asset types in the form of your ICT, particularly software-related issues, have gone on the positive. And this is because when COVID-19 came in, other than software development and other issues that emerged, people relied on electronics, softwares to connect, the purchase of software facilities to hold on to continue with business in the form of meetings. But otherwise, if you ask me, look at the area of health, for example, it also went on a negative in terms of negative growth, 3.6% negative growth. And in that regard, you can see that especially from the private sector, private hospitals, people could not go out to them. The occupancy rates of beds was even lower during COVID-19.
And when we look at COVID-19, now we are at level 2, and the economy is actually opening up at level 2. Going forward, do we expect that, we are going to see more economic activity? I know you don't have a crystal ball, and you seldom don't want to actually venture into, commenting on such issues. But with COVID-19 in the lockdown now at level 2, what do you expect to happen to the South African economy going forward?
Xolani, my Sangoma has always told me that I must throw the bones, but I must never tell what the bones are saying until the time is appropriate to comment on the numbers. So we will always measure, and we will always come back at the end of the quarter. Once the quarter is concluded, we will come back and inform South Africans. There may be a lot of speculations, of course. There will be a lot of views as to which way the economy will go. But if you allow us to go and measure, we will come back and make the numbers available at the appropriate time.
Well, thank you so much for that. Good chatting to you once again. That's the Statistician-General Risenga Maluleke. And as you can hear, he's not about to be throwing the bones. Well, he says he will be throwing the bones, but he's not going to tell you what the bones are saying.